Good evening everyone. Good evening. I know everybody's very excited to see familiar faces again. TMA does that. We bring people together, and of course that means we like to exchange ideas and chat and catch up as well. But I've been asked to start promptly at 7, so Larry can get you out of here at 10:45. Duffy and I, we wondered a long time whether that was a typo or not. I hope is Duffy corralling other people who are still outside? They're coming, excellent. So my name is Robert Schindler. I am the William Hutton Kyoto of European Art at the Toledo Museum of Art. And it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to the Glass Salon at TMA's Glass Pavilion on this somewhat gloomy autumnal Toledo evening. I'm very excited that so many of you turned out, although I'm not surprised at all, given who tonight's speaker is, who I have the great pleasure of introducing. Lawrence Larry W. Nichols is my predecessor. He has asked me to do two things. One is to be on time, which I hope we are. And the other thing is to be brief. The letter is more difficult as even a longer introduction won't do justice to his career, his legacy at TMA, and his impact on the field more broadly. Now, for those of you who have been connected with TMA for a while, Larry really needs no introduction. And for those of you who are new to TMA, first of all, a warm welcome. And second of all, please look him up. He's really rather accomplished. In the briefest of ways, however, Larry has a BA from Dartmouth and a PhD from Columbia. Started his career as a curator at the Philadelphia Museum of Art and then joined the Toledo Museum of Art in 1992. He retired in 2021 when he became TMA's first curator emeritus. In his almost 30-year career at TMA, his impact on this museum and the collection cannot be overrated. He bought outstanding works of art, conceived many important exhibitions that have shaped TMA's reputation as a museum of international importance, most recently, the brilliance of Caravaggio, which I hope you all have seen. And he has published scholarship that has greatly advanced our knowledge and understanding in many areas of art history. And because of it, I can tell you that he is one of the most respected colleagues in the field. Now, working with the collection as distinguished as TMA, Larry has become a bit of a work of art himself. He is the kind of curator who should be collected by museums. He combines a keen eye with a true love for art, an interest in everything, and a memory to be jealous of. His notebooks are legendary. He's an outstanding colleague, mentor, and a friend, and I'm pleased to call him all of those things. Now, Larry has kindly agreed to let me introduce him. He sometimes does these in very short ways, fine. Possibly he thought I was qualified to pronounce the title of his talk somewhat correctly, although I realize Stendhal is a person and not a German city. Before I hand it over to Larry, I've been asked to draw attention to two things, which I'm not sure if they're on the list here. Well, the first rule in introducing people is not to draw attention to oneself, so allow me to deviate for just a second. But knowing that you are here for an Old Master topic, I want to draw your attention to an upcoming Old Master exhibition at TMA on the great Dutch flower still life painter Rachel Ruysch that I encourage you all to come back to see starting April 12th. And then Duffy has asked me to draw your attention to the Great Art Escape happening at TMA December 27th through 29th. 3 days of winter fun activities for all ages, including hot chocolate bar, my kids are gonna come, cookie decorating, and sock skating to take place in the glass salon. The theme this year is Winter Wonderland. And now, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to invite Larry to the stage for his lecture, Socksknockers I Have Experienced on the Attack of the Stendhal Syndrome. Now, be prepared to have your your socks knocked off. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. I'm honored. And Robert, thank you for, where'd you go, Robert? Thank you for your kind introduction. Truly, you have to see the show he has organized on Rachel Rausch that opens next week in Munich. If you're going to be in Munich between now and the early part of the winter, you can catch the show there. Did I turn this thing on yet? We're all good? It's supposed to be green and now it's green. I'm doing the right thing now, right? Very good. How the heck with this thing? On the 15th of December, 2018, a tourist visiting the Uffizi galleries in Florence had a heart attack while admiring Botticelli's renowned painting, The Birth of Venus, created around 1485. 2 years previously, another tourist had an epileptic fit in front of the picture. Chance? Mere anecdote? Or is it possible that there is more to account for such occurrences? I need some help, please. It's supposed to advance. Olivia. So you want me to use that? There we go. Thank you. For the record, that was my bad. On the 20th of January, 1817, the French novelist Marie-Henri Bayle, who adopted the pen name Stendhal, and whose portrait by a minor Swedish painter you see here, would record in his journal, published in 1826 in his book, Naples and Florence, A Journey from Milan to Reggio, quote, "As I descended upon Florence from the high ridges of the Apennine, my heart was leaping wildly within me. What utter childish excitement." Bayle headed immediately to the Basilica of Santa Croce, which you see here on the left. He notes his response to being in the presence of the tombs of Michelangelo, Machiavelli, and Galileo. "The tide of emotion which overwhelmed me flowed so deep that it scarce was to be distinguished from religious awe." At his request, a friar unlocked a chapel that Stendhal wanted to visit. Bayle continues, "There, seated upon the step of a pray stool, With my head thrown back to rest upon the desk so that I might let my gaze dwell on the ceiling, I underwent through the medium of Volterrano's Sibyls. He's speaking about the four figures in the pendentives of the ceiling, which I show you here at right. I underwent through the medium of Volterrano's Sibyls the profoundest experience of ecstasy that, as far as I am aware, I ever encountered through the painter's art. My soul, affected by the very notion of being in Florence and by the proximity of those great men whose tombs I had just beheld, was already in a state of trance. Absorbed in the contemplation of sublime beauty, I could, as it were, feel the stuff of it beneath my fingertips. I had attained to that supreme degree of sensibility where the divine intimations of art merge with the impassioned sensuality of emotion. As I emerged from the porch of the Santa Croce, I was seized with a fierce palpitation of the heart. The wellspring of life was dried up within me, and I walked in constant fear of falling on the ground. Somehow you can do it. Bear with this rather creepy voice.
Not just making you say wow and take some pictures, but a place that has such beautiful art or architecture that it affects your body and mind profusely. If so, you are not the first nor the last to experience this. There's actually a name for this, the Stendhal Syndrome. It's a psychosomatic condition that arises when somebody is completely overwhelmed by the beauty of art. It's a mental condition which leads to physical symptoms like an increased heartbeat, dizziness, confusion, fainting, or a panic attack.
Florence syndrome, art syndrome, tourist disease, call it what you will. The condition was professionally diagnosed and named Stendhal Syndrome in 1979 by the Italian psychiatrist Dr. Graziele Magarini, chief psychiatrist at Florence's Santa Maria Nuova Hospital from the late 1960s onward, who would publish a book with this title in 1989, which she's holding in this image. The British Medical Journal noted in a study that she had recorded 106 incidents of patients being admitted to the hospital between 1977 and 1986 after experiencing, quote, acute transient psychiatric symptoms in response to viewing the art of Florence. She found that the syndrome hits mostly first-time Western tourists, usually unmarried persons between the ages of 20 and 40. American visitors seem less affected. Make of that what you will. Symptoms include palpitations, dizziness, fainting, nausea, and hallucinations. While some affected have been encountered wandering in the streets, unable to recall their names, about 2/3 of the affected develop paranoid psychoses. Most sufferers are able to return home after a few days of bed rest. Another published medical paper describes Stendhal syndrome as follows. Although it is colloquially known that beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder, it is necessary to mention that the appreciation of beauty contained in masterpieces is not perceived only through the eyes, but through other sense organs as well. The reaction triggers a series of somatosensory responses of diverse nature, with a wide range of responses that altogether constitute a pathological phenomenon that can be defined as syndromatic by eliciting signs and symptoms of a physical, physiological, and psychotic nature, end quote. Now, being a mere art historian, the word somatosensory sent me to my dictionary. Of or relating to sensations that involve parts of the body not associated with primary sense organs. I hasten to add that though the evidence is real, Stendhal syndrome is not included in the 2023 American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. I checked at the Toledo Public Library. As a geographic semantic aside, Florence is not alone in having a syndrome associated with it. First reported in 2011, Detroit syndrome is a form of age discrimination in which workers of a certain age are replaced by those who are younger, faster, and stronger, not to mention endowed with new skills better suited for the modern workplace. Stockholm syndrome refers to when persons taken hostage develop an emotional attachment or a sense of loyalty toward their captors or abusers. Some even start to actively cooperate, crossing the line from victim to perpetrator. This syndrome was first named after a bank robbery turned hostage situation in Stockholm in the summer of 1973. The robbers held 4 bank employees hostage for 6 days in the building I show you at the upper left. The hostages were strapped to dynamite and locked up in a vault. After the negotiated surrender of the robbers, the hostages felt more afraid of the police, raised money for the defense of the captors, and refused to testify against them. One of the hostages even became engaged to one of the captors. Lima syndrome describes the exact opposite of the Stockholm syndrome. That is, the captors develop positive attachments to their hostages. The name refers to a crisis in the Peruvian capital in December 1996, when at the Japanese ambassadorial residence seen here at right, members of the Tupac Amaru revolutionary movement took 600 guests hostage. The captors became so empathetic toward the guests that they let most of them go within days, including high-value individuals such as the mother of the then president of Peru. Marie-Henri Bayle was born in Grenoble in 1783 and died in Paris in 1842 at the age of 59. He had led an unhappy childhood. His mother, Henriette, whom he adored, died in childbirth when he was 7, and he intensely disliked his father. Seen here at left, Cherubin Bayle, a lawyer in Parliament, but was close to his maternal grandfather, Henri Gagnon, a doctor of medicine, who you see on the right. And it was in the home of his grandfather that the youth was lodged. A plaque on the still existing dwelling calls attention to this. I took these photos in 2017. I've had this lecture topic in the back of my mind for some time. Bayle did have a long-standing fondness for his sister, Pauline, and conducted correspondence with her for decades after he departed Grenoble at age 16. A little-known French painter is responsible for this rendering of Bayle, who first ventured to Paris for study. Not long thereafter, he was in Italy, where he joined General Bonaparte's army, in which he would serve as a soldier in the army, and subsequently as an administrator, including during the 1812 invasion of Russia. In fact, in his own lifetime, he was best known as a fervent supporter of Napoleon. Today, however, he is best known as a novelist, more on that momentarily, but he also was a critic, art historian, musicologist, journalist, biographer, diarist, letter writer, and womanizer. In light of the syndrome that bears his name, he borrowed his pen name Stendhal from the German city Stendhal, birthplace of Johann Joachim Winckelmann, an art historian and archaeologist famous at the time. I found it quite curious in my reading of him that he regularly recorded his sensations, his word. He waxes eloquent about chestnut trees, about music, church bells, mountains, the view from atop Vesuvius, watching sunrises and sunsets, observing a comet on the 31st of August, 1811 at 3 a.m., witnessing an eclipse, observing fires. He described Moscow burning as the most beautiful blaze in the world, and certainly women's faces. His diary entries frequently employ superlatives. On the 30th of April, 1818, the nicest evening I've ever spent in Paris. On visiting the Sèvres porcelain factory, the prettiest manufactured objects I've ever seen, on his love of Italy, Milan in particular. I sense in every pore of my body that this country is the land of the arts. I believe that the arts hold the same place in the hearts of the inhabitants as vanity does in the hearts of the French. And on the occasion of Napoleon's remains returning to Paris in 1840, he opined that the tomb should be a brick copy of the temple at Paestum, the most beautiful building in Italy. Not surprisingly, he was always fretting about experiencing boredom or himself being boring. He is best known today for the novels Le Rouge et le Noir, The Red and the Black, published in 1830, and La Chartreuse de Parme, The Charterhouse of Parma, published in 1839. The notorious womanizer also penned a tome on love. I show the title page from an early French edition, as well as the cover of a Penguin classic. 4 of his liaisons, often persons affiliated with the opera, were Minette de Griesheim and Angela Petragrua, Mathilde Dembowski and Julia Rinieri de Rossi. There won't be a quiz. This last known portrait of Stendhal, a drawing by Henri Lehmann, a German-born French artist, you see now. In Stendhal's later years, he suffered from ailments associated with syphilis and treatments for the disorder. At 59, aware of his failing heart, Stendhal wrote to a friend, "I find that there is nothing ridiculous about dropping dead in the streets, as long as one doesn't do it deliberately." As one would happen, he suffered a stroke on the Rue des Capucines, not far from the Place Vendôme on the right bank in the 2nd arrondissement, and Stendhal passed away in his nearby apartment on the 23rd of March, 1842. When residing in Paris in 2023, I sought out his grave in the Montmartre cemetery where he is buried, and I paid my respects to the man. In the Luxembourg Gardens, there is a monument to him, the Tondo profile portrait of him on it by Rodin after David d'Angers. And in both the French and Italian capitals, there are plaques honoring his residences in Paris and in Rome. His native Grenoble has a school named after him, and one can find in that city a museum dedicated to him. This, even though he had written of his native city, quote, "Grenoble is for me like the memory of an abominable indigestion." The fame of the man is alive and well. I show you a street placard I encountered 2 years ago in Paris announcing a conference on him. This past summer, there was a music concert in Ireland bearing his name, and it should not surprise, a movie about the syndrome was made in 1996. Stendhalian commerce is rampant. Want a red and black necklace to go with your reading? Voila. Need lipstick? No problem. How about some perfume? Can do. Even the clothier J. Peterman warns that Stendhal Syndrome could befall others if you slip into one of its slinky red dresses. Put simply, as the idiom has it, sex sells. I commenced my 8th decade of life this past September, and to varying degrees during my lifetime, I have experienced the effects of Stendhal Syndrome. At the outset of this component of my lecture, the Socksknockers I have experienced part, I forthrightly acknowledge that my own responses may more accurately fall into what Dr. Keltner labels as awe in his 2023 book, Awe, the new science of everyday wonder and how it can transform your life. Awe, he writes, is really a feeling state. It's the emotion you have when you encounter a vast mystery. Awe, wonder. I have had impassioned responses to works of art that have overwhelmed my emotions, and I can emphatically assert that I have had physical responses too, the additional characteristic that distinguishes Stendhal Syndrome, though I have stayed hospital-free. I have been spellbound in the presence of things that evoke in me a sense of the sublime, that induce in me the transcendent, that conjure in me the ineffable. To be sure, there are at least two components at play in this dynamic, the object and the individual. Botticelli's Birth of Venus and the individual who sadly suffered the heart attack. Il Volterrano's Sibyls in the dome of the Niccolini Chapel in Santa Croce, and Stendhal. And whereas the object is inert, immutable, timeless, doubtless the expectations, the motivations, the circumstances of the individual play no small part in engendering the phenomenon I am addressing. Witness the aforementioned statement by Stendhal: as I descended upon Florence from the high ridges of the Apennine, my heart was leaping wildly within me. Full disclosure, in 1998, this individual, that is your speaker, organized a small exhibition at the TMA titled Seeking the Sublime, Paintings by Friedrich and Koch on loan. Conceivably, some of you recollect seeing this one gallery show. What I wanted to imply with my wording of the show's title, Seeking the Sublime, was the proactive searching for the transcendent in nature by two German 19th century painters, Caspar David Friedrich and Anton Koch. But in hindsight, 26 years on, I acknowledge I am forced to muse. Was the seeking of the sublime no less that of the exhibition's organizer, that is, my own? In the spring of 1974, as a 19-year-old college sophomore, while studying in the city of Blois, France, on a language abroad program, on our midterm break, I purposely ventured to Athens to join up for a few days with a classics professor and his students from a class that I had audited, a group that was subsequently touring in Greece. I visited the Acropolis in Athens, which I show you here in my Kodak Instamatic photograph taken from the Agora. And here, the west facade and southern flank of the Parthenon. And the Propylaea, the ceremonial gateway to the Acropolis, constructed in 437 to 32 BC in the Doric order. Now, be it Larry the downright out-and-out klutz, or ought it to be attributed to utter awe, I remember to this day what is now 50 and a half years ago, falling flat on my face as I ascended the immense stairs of the Propylaea. Not watching my footing, Stendhal Syndrome, I'm still not certain. 3 years later, in 1977, after graduating from college and putting a stint in with a crew painting a church ceiling in Ozone Park in Queens, mind you, with a roller, not a paintbrush, I put on a backpack and undertook my 5-month Magellan trek, as I like to refer to it. I traveled around the globe, and not surprisingly, I intentionally made it to Egypt. At Giza, I was dumbstruck by the immensity of the Pyramid of Khufu, the tomb of the Old Kingdom 4th Dynasty pharaoh, also known as Cheops. The base of the overwhelming edifice measures 756 feet, in excess of 2.5 football fields, and the footprint of the pyramid takes up 13 acres. It's incomprehensibly massive. It took some 2.3 million large blocks to erect, each estimated to weigh 2.5 tons, and each of consequential height, which you can gauge from this image. On May 13th, 1977, yours truly climbed barefoot to the apex of the Pyramid of Cheops. Even attempting to do so today would land one behind bars. But this was 1977. Things were quite different, including my waistline. That's the Pyramid of Khephren at left. Rather matter-of-factly, even tritely, I jotted in my journal that evening, I climbed to the top of the 481-foot Great Pyramid of Cheops today. It is 4,630 years old, being built in the year around 2650 BC. I have seen plenty of impressive objects in this world, but the pyramids are truly astounding. Staying with colossal structures having spiritual intent that profoundly awed me, on the island of Java in Indonesia, I visited Borobudur, the 9th century Buddhist temple northwest of Yogyakarta. Only rediscovered in 1806, it had been completely covered in vegetal growth, ash, and dirt. The base of the 9-tiered mass measures 404 feet. The sides of each level are decorated with more than 2,000 relief panels. You can see some in this photograph from 1913. And atop the temple were initially 72 Buddha statues, each seated inside a perforated stupa. Both monks and tourists enter onto the precinct itself today. As was the case when I visited in 1977, you can make out a few of the persons on the temple in this shot I took. That said, this sophomoric behavior of a then college graduate likely was not a condoned act, and I acknowledge now, quite seriously actually, not a very respectful one. Another Buddhist gem of an entirely different character, which rendered me absorbed in the contemplation of sublime beauty, to quote Stendhal, the Zen garden of Ryoanji Temple in Kyoto. Founded in 1450, its white gravel and 15 stones enable, yea, compels, silent contemplation. I first gawked at the stained glass windows of Saint Chapelle on the Ile de la Cité in Paris more than 5 decades ago, and I have been drawn back I cannot count how many times since. Commissioned by King Louis IX to house his collection of relics of the Passion of Christ, the superlative Gothic Holy Chapel was consecrated in 1248. The walls, if one can call them that, appear to be entirely made of stained glass. The colors, the patterns, the experience of light, the phenomenon of standing in the presence of these marvels is staggeringly indescribable. Paradoxically, I deem the famed Taj Mahal the most underrated structure I have ever encountered. Commissioned in 1631 on the occasion of the death of Mumtaz Mahal, wife of Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan, the marble mausoleum in Agra was completed in 1648. I penned in my log, "It's more magnificent than I had expected, so perfect, seen from a distance with the reflecting pond, the size of the tomb appears much smaller than when one is assaulted by the facade close up." And I go on to talk about the octagonal shape, making it weightless, and the dome seems to float. Truly an architectural example of perfection. You got a peek a moment ago. What's next? Jumping 4.5 centuries, I.M. Pei's bewilderingly beautiful East Building of the National Gallery of Art in Washington was completed in 1978. Just as Frank Gehry would do with the Center for the Visual Arts abutting Edward Green's neoclassical Toledo Museum of Art, Pei adopted a modernist austere idiom when creating his design to independently stand alongside architect John Russell Pope's initial 1941 neoclassical temple of a building. Pei's challenge was to situate his structure on a trapezoidal plot of land. This is at the far right of what you're looking at. And he rose to the occasion with aplomb. His solution, two triangular forms that join in a remarkable atrium. His irregular glass pyramids cleverly allow light to pass to the underground passageway that links the two buildings, while from the exterior their planes, angles, and shapes interact with the stone of the nearby building. The East Building has a stunning abstract quality to it, both outside and inside, half of which is dedicated gallery space and half of which is designed for offices, as well as the terrific Center for Advanced Study in the Visual Arts. I show you here a detail of the multi-level stacks of the library, with yours truly standing by the railing when in 2017 I had the good fortune to be a visiting senior fellow, which allowed me to finalize preparations for our exhibition, Frans, Hals, the Family Group Portraits. Living in a Pei building for 12 weeks, which I darn near actually did, was uncanny. More Pei, this time on a mountaintop in Japan. I have twice been to the Miho Museum not far from Kyoto, and it is an achievement of the highest order. As Pei has described, one embarks on a journey experiencing his creation. One crosses a bridge, enters a lengthy curving tunnel, and is released to a vista of the museum proper. Traversing a courtyard, one ascends stairs and arrives at a profoundly astonishing threshold, a transparent one that more than hints at what is beyond. A vista to a bonsai-esque tree and mountains beyond. The whole experience is enough to make one stand on one's head. The Irishman by birth, my friend Brian Kennedy, a former director of this here Toledo Museum of Art, had a word for a painting that I was proposing to him for purchase that rang his bell. He would say, I won't try his Irish accent, he would say, "That's a cracker." A thunderclap was the vocabulary called upon by the great woman Anne Darnancourt, rest in peace, former director of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, who offered me my first job back in 1986. In an interview she gave in 2006, she stated, "I think we remember art in many ways. One we certainly remember is individual encounters with works of art that are like a thunderclap. We suddenly find ourselves in front of something and we are mesmerized and we can't forget it. It is an encounter that can happen anywhere. You can walk around the corner and have this amazing experience. What life depends on is encounters." As for Anne's usage of the verb mesmerize, the word, as you may know, derives from the 18th century German physician Franz Anton Mesmer, who proposed the existence of a process of natural energy transference occurring between all animate and inanimate objects, which he called animal magnetism, and which came to be referred to as mesmerism. And as we consider Stendhal Syndrome, I trust you will register this is not a mere semantic digression on my part. Cracker, thunderclap. You will note from how I have titled this talk, Socksknockers I have experienced. I relish employing the pseudo word Socksknockers. In January of 1984, I visited the Gemälde Gallery Alte Meister, the Old Master Paintings Gallery in Dresden, renowned for, among numerous other standouts, paintings by Caravaggio and Rembrandt. But it was this painting which you've been looking at, a work by an artist I in fact had previously never heard of, Jean-Etienne Liotard, that completely overwhelmed me. His masterpiece, La Belle Chocolatière, The Chocolate Girl, is a pastel datable about 1743. Within a decade, it came into the possession of King August III of Poland, who wrote of it to a collector acquaintance, "I have bought a pastel picture about 3 feet high by the celebrated Liotard. It shows a young German chambermaid in profile carrying a tray with a glass of water and a cup of chocolate. The picture is almost devoid of shadows, with a pale background, the light being furnished by 2 windows reflected in the glass. It is painted in halftones with imperceptible gradations of light and with perfect modeling." Liotard, who you see here in 2 self-portraits, lived from 1702 to 1790. He was a Swiss artist who worked in Paris, Holland, and England in both pastels and oils. And yes, he traveled to Istanbul and was influenced by wardrobes there. What about Liotard's Chocolate Girl stupefied me so? The balance of the composition, the subtlety of the colors, the rendering of stuffs, and the aura, the mood, the silence of the image. To give you a quick viewing of 2 other works by this singular creative talent, in this oil painting in the Getty Museum of about 1781 to 83, Still Life with Tea Service, a tray is set with 6 cups and saucers, a teapot, sugar bowl, milk jug, and a lidded vase, perhaps containing an extra supply of tea leaves. And in this pastel from about 1755, also in the Getty, portrait of Maria Frederica van Reda Althonle, a 7-year-old daughter of an aristocratic Dutch family. She looks off to the side in a 3 3/4 view. Lost in thought, she is composed yet somewhat shy in comparison to her dog, who stares out with canine curiosity. It was this very object that was the catalyst for me keeping a list of Socksknockers, which I'm drawing on for this presentation. And if I've already shared with you architectural standouts, the Propylaea to Tay, I want now to focus further on paintings for the most part. That said, first, a miraculous staircase. 'Tis indisputable, Michelangelo's Sistine ceiling is an unrivaled artistic achievement. But his design for the entry steps to the Laurentian Library in Florence is what physically overwhelmed me. I remember going up and down these stairs repeatedly. They were that comfortable to ascend and to descend. Michelangelo gave intense study to his design, which went through many iterations. I show but one of the many such drawing studies. Every occasion that I encounter a staircase that is not suitable for human consumption, I think of Michelangelo's sympathetic understanding of proportion and scale, his wedding of form and function in a miraculous manner. If art could depict the manners and the mind, there would be no painting on earth more beautiful, reads the inscription on the painted paper at center right in this portrait of Giovanna degli Albizzi, a gem of 1488 by the Florentine master Domenico Ghirlandaio, which today is displayed in the Thyssen-Bornemisza collection in Madrid. The sitter had married Lorenzo Tornabuoni in 1486 and sadly died 2 years subsequent to this immortalization of her beauty. The composition depicts Giovanna in half-length, in strict profile, silhouetted against a dark ground and an open closet with jewelry and a book. Her slender neck, her blonde hair in a complex configuration, and her expressionless face are alluring and then some, says this possessor of the male gaze. She holds a handkerchief while red beads curiously but visually thrillingly are suspended at the upper right. A final observation, Ghirlandaio meticulously renders the rich and luxurious fabrics of her garments. I find the painting trance-inducing. The second of 5 individual portraits that I will be showing you, Raphael's portrait of Baldassare Castiglione, is truly one of my all-time favorite works of art. I'll admit it, I want to look like how Raphael has depicted Baldassare Castiglione. A courtier, diplomat, soldier, and author, the man lived from 1478 to 1529. He was 37 or 38 when this portrait was painted in 1515 to 16. Today, this Renaissance icon hangs in the Louvre. Alas, 99% of the masses parade right by it as they make their way to take in Mona you-know-who. The portrait, in one sense, is confrontational. Castiglione peers directly out at us, his large blue eyes commanding that they become our focal point. The flesh tones of his countenance are entirely surrounded by his neat brown beard and his expansive black beret, the circular contour of which is wondrously broken up. Depicted in half-length, Raphael endows Castiglione with a pervasive, one might say, total calm. Stasis prevails. He gives the form of the figure a pyramidal stability. His hands, only partially rendered, are clasped together at the lower left. I submit that we would register this man's intellectual and moral character, even if the identity of the sitter were unknown. In the event, we know that Castiglione was the author of a book of manners, etiquette, and morality titled, in translation, The Book of the Courtier. Published in 1528, hence some 13 years after Raphael's painting, its subject is a discussion, the book's subject is a discussion of what constitutes an ideal Renaissance gentleman. To be sure, an ideal Renaissance gentleman needs to look like Raphael's portrait of Baldassare Castiglione. In the north, in what is termed early Renaissance, early northern, in the north, what is termed early Netherlandish painting, the pièce de résistance is Jan van Eyck's altarpiece of the Lamb of about 1432 in St. Bavo's Church in Ghent, known as the Ghent altarpiece. I have viewed it on many occasions, including mid-March 2020, just 2 days prior to COVID changing the world, during the astounding Van Eyck retrospective. The enormous multi-panel conglomeration of life-size figures, at left is the altarpiece with the wings closed, and at right is the open prospect, is indeed awe-inspiring. But a single panel altarpiece, datable just a few years later, 1435 to 1438, today in the Prado in Madrid, is the northern creation of this era that has repeatedly stolen my breath. Rogier van der Weyden's Deposition. I have already acknowledged that, as held true for Stendhal and Florence, the circumstances of the individual inextricably contribute to one's response to a work of art. The not inconsequential role of my adherence to the tenets of the belief system central to this image doubtless stimulates my emotional reaction to the object. Yet it is the sheer mastery of the composition of this painting, in contradistinction to the countless others of the subject, that I find transcendent. The frieze-like arrangement of the 10 figures in a shallow foreground space, St. John at left in red, Mary Magdalene at right, encloses, as it were, the stop-action drama portrayed. Absolutely every brushstroke, every detail serves to convey the message at hand. And it is the language of hands that is so utterly poignant in this painting. We'll move from Roger van der Weyden onto the Isenheim altarpiece, another landmark of Northern Renaissance religious painting, which is found in the Unterlinden Museum in Colmar in Alsace, France. Matthias Grunewald's Isenheim altarpiece of 1512 to 16. With its two sets of wings, the complex creation originally allowed for no less than 3 configurations or views, which are now all possible to experience given how the altarpiece is currently displayed disassembled. On my solitary visit to Colmar, I remember becoming the art historian in the presence of this standout endeavor, as I tried to reconstruct in my mind its original various openings. In truth, it was for me, for the most part, an academic experience. Whereas in the presence of Grunewald's The Small Crucifixion, as it is known, a painting of the same decade measuring only 24 by 18 inches, my response is a spiritual one. Its scale makes plain it was intended for private devotion rather than a public setting in a church or hospital, as was the case for his Isenheim altarpiece. Only 20 paintings by Grunewald are extant, and The Small Crucifixion is the only one in the United States. It is part of the collection of our own National Gallery of Art in Washington. As the museum's interpretive material so trenchantly notes, Grunewald resorted to a mixture of ghastly realism and coloristic expressiveness. I did a 3-month volunteer internship at the wonderful Smith College Museum of Art, and there is a Grunewald drawing and preparatory study of fabric in that collection as well, the second of 2 Grunewald objects in our country. A subject domain leap, landscapes. For me, all roads at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York lead to Peter Bruegel the Elder's The Harvesters. I never tire of the composition. One of 6 panels painted in 1565 on commission from an Antwerp merchant for his country house, each representing 2 months, the series therefore comprised a year. 5 of the 6 survive, the others are in the museums in Vienna and Prague. Here, July and August are thought to be represented. Foreground, middle distance, and a vast distance, microcosm and macrocosm, near tree, far off coast, horizon line. While some laborers work the fields at harvest time, others eat, and one memorable sprawled fellow is logging some Z's. Ostensibly a realistic view, a 16th century photographic rendering, if you will, such an elevated vantage point simply does not exist in Flanders, and so artistic license has been called upon. With Nicholas Poussin's Landscape with a Calm of 1650 to 51, realism enters, entirely metamorphoses into the realm of idealism. Today in the Getty Museum, the French artist painted this dreamscape in Rome for a Parisian friend. Landscape with a Calm does not illustrate a story, rather it evokes a mood, one of tranquility. The composition is ordered, the eye is led from foreground to middle distance, to the mountainous distance with trees and reflections of trees, offering us visual clues to the linking of associated spaces. An inventory drawn up at the first owner's collection describes the painting thusly: simply, a castle lit by the sun, and in front a herdsman with his goats. And the same inventory cites the pendant that Poussin painted, Landscape with a Storm, now in the museum in Rouen. Thunder and storm with a cart drawn by oxen. I cherish each, and I yearn to see them side by side. I wager that more than a few of you earlier this year, as Robert noted, took in the museum's exhibition, the brilliance of Caravaggio, 4 paintings in focus. Caravaggio's The Taking of Christ, which you see here, was not included. It's on permanent loan to the National Gallery of Ireland in Dublin, and the TMA's show drew only from American public collections. There are some 67 paintings by Caravaggio known. I've seen all but 15 of them. This work from his hand is the one that flabbergasts me the most. The immediacy, the fury, the terror, and the shocking sense of observation, both ours and that of Caravaggio himself, for that is he in the upper right bearing a lantern illuminating the positively dynamic scene void of any background entirely. The composition is a total triumph of fictive naturalism. In its presence, one physically dwells with the work. Away from it, one thinks of being so. The clarity and staying power of the depiction is that intense. Rudolph II, Holy Roman Emperor in Prague, obtained this unicum prior to 1604, just a couple of years after its creation. And it is recorded that he, and I quote, it's from Monder who's writing, the biographer, artist biographer, 1604, Dutchman, painter himself. He writes, the emperor was most astonished by the technique and how it was done, calling in some practitioners of art who were also amazed, for it is very interesting and effective to look upon. Mirabile visu indeed. It is from the inimitable hand of Hendrik Goltzius. Some of you may remember it as the opening object in the museum's 2004 retrospective on the artist, which I co-organized. I cannot tell a lie, I wrote my dissertation on the paintings of this engaging talent. And I cannot tell a lie, I was responsible for my previous employer, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, acquiring this work in 1990. The subject is taken from a maxim of the Roman dramatist Terence. Without Ceres and Bacchus, Venus would freeze, which appeared in his comedy, The Eunuch, written in 161 BC. The technique we determined in the conservation lab in Philadelphia, bluish-gray oil paint as a ground, pen and ink applied so as to appear as engraved lines, and finally brushed on oil colors, red, orange, yellow, a transparent crimson and white. Everything about this object is ravishingly memorable. Perhaps many of you anticipated I'd show this image, and I see a smile or two in the audience. In 2010, on a visit to a dealer in London with the aim of asking to borrow a painting by Manet for an exhibition, you can see it resting on a chair in the corner, I was rendered speechless to encounter hanging in the room a family portrait by Frans Hals. The rest is history, which I've recounted many a time. The TMA was able to purchase the painting, our first by this renowned 17th century Dutch portraitist. When bought, it was known to be a fragment of a larger composition, having been cut at some undetermined point, likely in the 17th or perhaps in the 18th century. And as I well imagine, most of you experienced the reunification of the Van Campen family in our exhibition held in 2018-19. In sum, my stunned state when I initially viewed this work at the dealer's gallery had more than a little to do with the curator's institutional covetousness. And the painting, our painting, is today, I'm right now it's in Berlin? On its way back. It was in a retrospective that was in Berlin recently. Rembrandt. His drawings are masterful. When I inquired of my Dartmouth undergraduate professor, Frank Robinson, a lifelong friend to this day, the standard question, how long did it take to make the landscape with a farmstead, formerly known as Winter Landscape, which I viewed on an excursion in 1974 to the Fogg Art Museum at Harvard, he responded, maybe 30 seconds, or I could also reply, a lifetime. The same can be said of the tender study at Wright of his wife, Saskia in bed. And his subject paintings are profound examinations of the human condition. On the screen now, Isaac and Rebecca, in the past known as the Jewish Bride, and the Denial of St. Peter, both in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. But for me, the Rembrandt Socksknocker is his 1654 portrait of Jan Six, which to this day remains in the possession of the Six family in their home in Amsterdam. It hangs by a window looking out on the Amstel River. And in this image, you can see some of the TMA patrons that Brian Kennedy, at left, and I toured on a trip a few years ago. Jan Six, a longtime acquaintance of the artist, ran a dye works factory, but he also was a poet and would, subsequent to this painting, become burgomaster of Amsterdam. Rembrandt's genius in portraiture was his unrivaled capacity to not only depict a person's outer appearance, but also his ability to convey a person's inner life. What Six is thinking about, who knows? But certain is that he is lost in thought and has the capacity to think. Six, in fact, wrote about this portrait of himself, "Such a face had I, Jan Six, who since childhood have worshipped the muses." Rembrandt's brushstrokes are rapid and controlled. An ungloved hand is captured in the process of pulling on the other. Distinguishing between a Rembrandt and a not Rembrandt, it invariably comes down to just how convincing the execution of such a detail actually is. And you are looking at creative virtuosity here. I show you Jan Six the 11th, seated with Rembrandt's painting of his ancestor. From the most famous of 17th century Dutch artists to one I had never heard of when I first oogled this painting in the Mauritshuis in The Hague. Still life with earthenware jug and clay pipes was painted by a 23-year-old named Pieter van Aanraad in 1658. A number of run-of-the-mill portraits from his hand are known, but this is the solitary still life in the artist's oeuvre. The design strength of Aanraad's composition, an earthenware jug, a coal pan, an adjacent dish of tobacco in stone pipes, and a glass of dark ale, all on a tabletop partially covered by a green cloth, is absolutely perfect. The soft light entering from the left is reflected by each object in its own particular way. It is a lifelike representation, to be sure, but likely, nonetheless, there is more. A case can be made that the objects depicted are allusions to the four elements: burning coals, fire; earthenware, earth; pipes, air; glass of beer, water. Would that we had additional still lives by this superb artist. Juan Sanchez Coton, a Spaniard, painted this balancing act of an unforgettable still life of 1602, which today is in the collection of the San Diego Museum of Art. Quince, cabbage, melon, and a cucumber suspended or lying on the ledge. It's an unflinching, naturalistic, deceptively simple painting, but it's also music and poetry. I adore hats. And the woman in this painting in the collection of the Musée des Beaux-Arts in Strasbourg has a smashing one indeed. La Belle Strasbourgeoise, as this portrait of an unknown woman is known, was painted in 1703 by Nichols de Largillière, a painter represented in the TMA collection, in fact. The sitter is depicted 3/4 length, out of doors, clutching a pooch and gazing directly out at we, the viewers. Such a garb and such a grand chapeau, if fancy, are not fanciful, as you see by this surviving costume of the period. But it is the massive black hat, which looks like it has been cleared for takeoff, that delightfully dumbfounds me. Jean-Simeon Chardin's basket of wild strawberries has been in my life since the autumn of 1979, when I lived with the picture for 12 weeks during my year as a National Endowment for the Arts graduate intern at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, during the retrospective devoted to the magician painter, as the critic Diderot labeled him. The composition is simple. And for once, I'll restrain myself and refrain from including adjectives and adverbs before that word, simple. The first time it was published in 1862, the painting was described as follows: a basket of strawberries, a crystal glass half full of water, shimmering with the rosy reflection of a fine peach, placed near 2 white carnations and some cherries. That is all he needed to make an exquisite piece. This treasure, only within this year, became, quite recently, a few months ago, became the 34th Chardin in the collection of the Louvre. It is a prize, a glory to behold. Go to Paris tomorrow to view it. But first, go across the street to see the TMA's 2 impeccably well-preserved genre scenes by Chardin, acquired in 2006. 7 dead fish heaped in a pile on a dark green surface, their bulging eyes alarmingly and disconcertingly unmistakable. Francesco Goya, the late 18th, early 19th century Spanish painter, one of the most deservedly famous artists of the Western world of all time, painted this and 11 other renderings of dead birds and animals, a series of still lifes that the artist hung in his own dining room. Others today are in the Louvre, the Prado, and on loan to the Met, among other locations. Though ostensibly about food, the true subject of Goya's still life with Bream is human mortality. It is a stupendous, challenging, and quite provoking image. I cannot get the work out of my mind, if only in part because in 1994, my second year as a curator here, the painting was offered to the TMA by a dealer in Paris. I tried vehemently to make my case for the painting, but curators recommend and directors decide, and alas, it was not to be. I shared the offering with a curator colleague then at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, and one has to go to Texas to see it. You'll never forget it. Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres painted this portrait of Louis-François Bertin in 1832, in which year the sitter was 66 years of age. Bertin was a French journalist from the time of the Revolution onwards, including the Napoleonic era and the Bourbon Restoration thereafter. I visited the Louvre on 22 occasions during the 5 months I resided in Paris in 2023, and on most sessions in the galleries of my favorite museum in the world, I would make a point to say hello to Ingres' portrait of Bertin. I relish the man's demeanor. His tousled hair is riveting. His eyes are curious. His downturned mouth is probing. For me, the portrait is hypnotic. And Bertin's hands, or ought I to say claws, are positively fascinating. Henri Matisse's still life with fishbowl, today in the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, a Fauvist endeavor of 1912, painted in the artist's garden conservatory in his home in Issy-les-Moulineaux, then a southwest suburb of Paris, is a favorite. But it is the Chapel of the Rosary, known as the Matisse Chapel in Vence, on the French Riviera that is the Socksknocker for me by this 20th century creative giant. The structure was built and decorated between 1947 and 51 and was considered by the artist to be his masterpiece. Matisse worked on the architecture, painted the murals, and designed the stained glass windows, including this one situated behind the altar, the motifs of which are found also in the TMA ceramic mural installed over in the Tillotson Phallus Court. He also designed the priest's vestments. I just read this week that MoMA has opened or about to open a show of Matisse's cutouts, which played a large role in these kinds of images you're seeing here. Matisse, here seated in the chapel, I know it's a little out of focus, but listen. He writes, "In the chapel advance, I have tried to achieve that balance of forces. The blues, greens, and yellows of the windows compose a light within the chapel. This light made up of colors is intended to play upon the white and black stencil surface of the wall facing the windows. The light is the essential element, coloring, warming, and animating the whole structure, to which it is desired to give an impression of boundless space, despite its small dimensions." End quote. The totality of the conception and its multimedia execution certainly strikes awe. To my last object I wish to share. I show you here the famous photograph from 1950 of Jackson Pollock painting in his East Hampton studio, pouring or dripping paint onto the canvas, now not on an easel, rather on the floor. The final Socksknocker I chose to share is Jackson Pollock's number 11, 1952. And I know this slide, I'll show you a good one in a moment, is not in sharp focus, but the image conveys the scale of the canvas. It measures just shy of 7 feet and is 16 feet wide. It is usually called an abstract expressionist painting, but to my mind, it is more correctly to be understood as a non-representational painting, since there have been abstracting expressionistic creations based on visual reality, which this is not, for over 5,000 years. Just think of Egyptian low-relief figural sculpture with profile heads, frontal bodies, and torsos and legs, frontal torsos and legs again depicted from a side vantage point. Whereas from Kandinsky in the early 20th century onwards, it is often the mind's eye, not the functioning of the eyeball, that is the visual source of inspiration. Renamed Blue Poles, reportedly by the artist himself, Pollock's painting was purchased by the National Gallery of Australia in Canberra in 1973. Shockingly, distressingly, in fact, I must relate that the TMA took a pass on this standout when it had the opportunity to acquire it. The only time I have experienced this wonderful canvas was at the Museum of Modern Art in New York at the 1999 Pollock retrospective. It was displayed on a freestanding wall in the center of a gallery, and I distinctly remember sensing an inexplicable magnetism when I was physically in the space of Blue Poles. I walked away from it, I returned to it. I walked away from it, I returned to it, and this played out a number of times. It was as if a force was holding me in its presence. No ambulance had to whisk me away, but something greater than a visual response was taking hold of me. It was physical. In retrospect, thoughts of Stendhal Syndrome. In conclusion, I would note that in November 1812, while in Napoleon's army on its fateful retreat from Moscow, Stendhal wrote in a letter to his sister Pauline, thinking he might not survive. Farewell, write to me, and remember to enjoy yourself. Life is brief. The intended art historical information in this lecture notwithstanding, if there is a single takeaway from this lecture, let it be Stendhal's words. Remember to enjoy yourself. Life is brief. Or, perhaps, darn it, do this, there it is. Stendhal said this, Stendhal said that. Don't you know what anybody else ever said? I thank you for your attention.